Hi everyone, welcome to this video where I'm just documenting a few summer meals that our family enjoyed recently. My family is made up of just me and my husband, but we have a friend living with us for a little while and a lot of friends came over this week, so the meals are quite adaptable. So this first day, I'm making burgers and sourdough breaded chicken tenders. Here, I'm just making the buns for the burgers. This is a quick sourdough recipe, so it includes sourdough starter and yeast, which is nice because I could make it only a few hours before I needed it. These are really fun to make. I've only made them a few times, and you'll see me squish them down in a minute, which is what I'll link the instructions below. Next time, I won't squish them down so much because it just seemed like they didn't rise as much as I was expecting. So if you're doing this, don't squish them down like I'm doing here. But I'm about to just let them rise for about an hour in a warm spot. And then I move on to my bread that I'm just preparing for the next day. Just a quick stretch and fold. I have a rosemary mix-in this bread. You'll see the rosemary off to the side there. I get my rosemary and other pantry staples in bulk from Azure Standard, and so I've been enjoying just incorporating a lot of those things into my breads recently. Okay, this was my favorite part of this day's dinner, and it was the chicken tenders. These are the best chicken tenders I've ever made. I just took some tenderloins. I did the little fork trick to take out that, I don't know what it's called, the middle part there. I don't like that part, so I just discarded those. And now I'm preparing my frying station. So I'll get 3 bowls. The first one I'm filling, this is just flour. I keep my flour in the freezer sometimes to keep it. And then the next bowl, I added sourdough breadcrumbs and all these seasonings that I'll link the recipe below. Mix that up. The next bowl, I'm adding some buttermilk, some sourdough discard, and an egg and whisking that all together. What I'm learning recently is that a lot of these recipes I'm seeing are really highly adaptable, so I can substitute or add what I am in the mood for or what we as a family are wanting that particular day, and recipes are now serving as kind of an inspiration or a starting point. So I have some avocado oil in my pan, and first I coat the chicken in flour, then I move on to the bowl of the wet ingredients, and then finally to the breadcrumb mixture, and then I'll put the chicken on the pan to fry. These turned out so well. I loved them, and here I'm just baking up my ginormous flat burger buns. And the whole meal came together really well. My husband grilled, and it was really fun to share a great summer meal with some friends. All right, this is the next day. This day I'm making chicken paninis with fresh pesto and sourdough bread. So here I'm just baking up that bread that I was preparing the day before, and I'm scoring it here. It turns out really beautifully. But I'll link the instructions, the recipe that I love to use for sourdough below. Here she is. She's gorgeous. And you always got to let your bread cool. So she's cooling for a little while. Now we're moving on to the pesto. There is nothing like fresh pesto. Store-bought pesto, I was spoiled. I think my mom used to make fresh pesto, and so I got to make it too. So this is either my mom's or my aunt's recipe. It's going to be 3 cups of basil, not packed, 2 cloves of garlic, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 3/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, and then 1/4 cup of pine nuts. But I prefer to use walnuts. That's what you'll see me using here because pine nuts are more expensive, and I had walnuts on hand. And then 1/2 cup of olive oil. And I also decided I wanted to put a little bit of lemon juice in there for some brightness. Oh, also, I didn't have enough basil at the time, and so I ended up adding some parsley, and that's such a good hack because it was phenomenal. It was still very good. All right, so here's where things start to move fast. I'm making my chicken, leftover tenderloins, perfect. I'm making breakfast cookies for breakfast, which is kind of random, but also kind of dessert-ish. Breakfast and dessert is what I like to say. And so those are going in the oven. I'm finishing up the chicken, which I just marinated. Quick marinade is just Italian dressing for me. It's just easy and simple, and I don't have to think about it, which is nice. Cookies came out of the oven. They were great. I'll link that recipe in the description. And then I'm cutting up my darling, beautiful loaf, finally. She's cold. She's ready to go. We're slicing her, which is the hardest part of sourdough bread for me, is slicing. They're so, some of them are extremely thick, but what can you do? All right, here is where we assemble the sandwiches. We have our mozzarella. We have our pesto, we have our chicken, and we put all of it together, butter the bread, like a grilled cheese, but better in every way. Fresh, summery, delicious. My dad's recipe. Thank you, Dad. Oh, the cheese, so good. So at the end of the day, the recipe, very simple. You can go out to the store and get whatever bread you want, whatever pesto you want, or you can make it at home if you have the time and capacity. Either way, it's going to be a great dinner. All right, next meal is, before the meal, I decided to make sourdough Pop-Tarts. I made these a few times before. I had prepped sourdough pie crust in the fridge, and I ended up using half of it to make Pop-Tarts. And the other half, I prepped chicken pot pie that you will not see in this video. But both super easy. I'll put the Pop-Tart recipe by Farmhouse on Boone in the description below so you can check it out. I love making Pop-Tarts, one of my favorite things. Here I'm just creating equal-ish rectangles with the pie crust. And then I have mulberry trees in my yard. And so I harvested them recently and made jam. And this is just the perfect way to eat jam, in my opinion. Regardless of whether or not you made the jam, this is what you should do with your jam. Make Pop-Tarts. I made a big batch of both these Pop-Tarts and the dinner that I'm about to make because we were bringing dinner to some of our friends who just had a sweet baby. And so I included some of these Pop-Tarts with that, which is just so fun. Here I'm making just an egg wash to go on top. I recently had to throw away my brush that I use. So I'm using a spoon, which took a long time, but just a quick little egg wash, and then they'll go in the oven to bake. Okay, about 30 minutes of baking later, here's what they look like. And I gotta let them cool before I put on the glaze, which is just milk and powdered sugar, although I used half and half this time because I had a lot of it. So I'm moving on to dinner. So I'm not a big cookbook person, but I do have a few, and this recipe comes from my favorite cookbook that I have, which I will link it down below if you're interested. The recipe itself is called chicken karahi, and it's one of our go-tos, especially when it's a little colder outside, but it still worked for a summer meal. I think I keep coming back to this recipe because it requires a lot of spices, and once you have those spices, it's honestly quite inexpensive to make. There's onions, there's ginger, there's garlic, there's tomatoes, and there's chicken thighs. And outside of that, it's just a lot of spices that gives the meal such character. So I like to have rice as the base of my meal and then add everything, including the sauce, on top, and then sprinkle it with fresh cilantro. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you were inspired, and I'll see you later.